Dr. Stephen Post, welcome to I should say, welcome back to Shrink Wrap Radio.
Thank you, David. It's a delight to be back with you.
Well, it's hard to believe that it's been 13 years since our last chat, and that was all about the psychology of doing good. And now it's 13 years later, and basically you've been on the same track. I mean, you were about doing good and love back then, and that's what you're about today. And in the years in between, you've been really busy, I must say, because as I look at your resume, I'm kind of blown away. Not only is there the book that we're going to be talking about, God and Love on Route 80. Do you say route or route?
I say Route 80, but if you want to say route, it's okay.
I don't know where route comes from in my brain, but I do say Route 80. And so we're gonna be talking about that. But boy, you've already written several hundred academic articles and at least 8 or more books. And so I guess I should ask you, how did you come about to write this most recent book?
You know, I've been teaching, David, in academic medical centers for the better part of 3 decades.
And you're not a doctor, right? I mean, you're not a medical doctor.
No, but I do an awful lot of clinical ethics consultation with patients and patients' families who are in the throes of making difficult decisions, from the neonatal intensive care unit to something post-surgical. And we were, incidentally, an epicenter for the COVID contagion, and I spent a lot of time with the adult children of COVID patients who were up in the intensive care unit, sedated and intubated, and helped figure out.
Yeah, that actually sounds like clinical work of a sort.
Yeah, it takes a lot of psychological background, and I've been doing this for so many years that I do think I could almost qualify as a psychologist, but actually I'm a philosopher, and I define myself as such.
I thought you were a psychologist, and that's how I originally titled this podcast, the title for this podcast today. But then, as I read in the book, I started to have some suspicions. And so...
well, a student of world religions and psychology in particular.
Yeah.
So when I was at the University of Chicago years back doing my doctorate, I had the honor of studying with people like Csikszentmihalyi, who was there doing his work on flow.
Oh, yeah.
I was more directly involved with Mircea Eliade, Joseph Campbell, and individuals who were writing about spirituality in a very global, subjective, experiential sense, and not in terms of dogmas and rituals and doctrines and all of these kinds of religious traditions.
Yeah. You know, speaking of the work that you're doing clinically, I've got on my table over here, I still have to turn it in. I forget what it's called, but it's my instructions to the medical community that I don't want to be intubated if I get COVID. So it's something that's on our minds.
Oh yeah, well, you know, that and should be. I mean, I met many adult children who just were so surprised by what had unfolded with their 86-year-old mother, who might have dementia secondary to Parkinson's disease. And part of my endeavor was not just to respect their wishes, but also to help them understand that even though they have a right for everything to be done as the proxy and surrogate decision makers, if you think about it strictly in terms of suffering and compassion, there's an awful lot to be said for leaving mom or dad with a non-invasive breathing mask, but don't put them on a ventilator, sedate them, because the likelihood of their ever getting off and ever having a single word again with you is very remote. And
well, that was my impression. That it reinforces my decision to hear what you're saying, because my age, the people I see on TV that they wheel out and they're, they're so happy. But the older ones, they've been under that intubation for like 13 months or something, and
Yeah.
that's no way to live.
And they just don't really come out of it. I mean, a very few cases.
Right.
So it's much, I think, better to be realistic and to think in terms of compassion.
Now we got sort of off on my question was how did you come to write this most recent book?
Okay.
And
Well, being in academic medical centers, it's a wonderfully scientific environment, and I love these contexts. However, there's a side to me that I wanted to unveil, simply because I do believe that many people have these experiences of synchronicity, to use Carl Jung's term, uh, uncaused causality, as he put it, those uncanny moments when, as if in answer to a prayer uh, or some desperate need, just the perfect person with the perfect insight at the perfect time suddenly arises, and you feel as though this is set up by the universe. Jung had lots of clinical encounters that he felt were facilitated when his patients felt somehow that that kind of synchronicity was occurring in the moment. So I had an experience when I was a youngster, which was really quite unusual, but really shaped my life. And and then various others in that modality of, if you like Larry Dossey, one mind, the kind of connectedness between us that is not merely biological, but has something to do with the collective unconscious, or whatever you
yeah,
want to
let me
use.
cut in here. I know that's key to what you're all about,
Mhm.
but I got a little information from our email exchange that I want to mention, which is that you wanted to establish your credentials before you wrote this book because it might look too soft-minded and could have subjected you to ridicule or rejection or put roadblocks in your path for where you plan to go as a professional. And I totally validate that decision. Having read the book, I could see where that would be justified. And then the other thing, taking you back to the story that you just started to share as the experience that you had as a young boy, you mentioned Joseph Campbell. And it seems to me that you got the call. You got the call very early. And man, did you ever stick to it? Okay, I'll let you talk again.
Yeah, I'm still on Route 80 in many ways, but sure, in the academic environment, one has to be thoughtful and even at times a little bit cunning, because there can be a lot of hostility against anyone who assumes a non-materialistic metaphysic. So I'm one of those people who, like many physicists and philosophers, would say mind before matter, that mind is not derivative is simply from matter, but that there's something about mind that is prime and not reductive in terms of being, shall we say, just an epiphenomenal reality based on brain tissues and cells and so forth. So I've always taken that view, and it's a very respectable view. But in the world of biology and research, it's suspect. When I started the Institute for Research on Unlimited Love, I was sitting at my office at Case Western, and I had a fax from Sir John Templeton. This was in 2000. He said, we need to start an institute that studies not just human love, but the love that made humans, the love that people feel sometimes even invaded by, as if it's not really their own, but it just somehow comes into their consciousness and inspires them. And I faxed back, Sir John, what should we call it? He said, well, the Institute for Research on Unlimited Love. And then I had this moment of slight trepidation. I faxed back, Sir John, maybe we should call it the Institute for Creative Altruism, because David, altruism is a safer, more social scientific biological term. And he faxed back, no, I think unlimited love up to $8.9 million. And I faxed back, Sir John, I love that language. It jumps right off the page. He knew what I would do in my heart, and he wanted to challenge me to be who I was. And so I owe him a lot.
So for you, the call began with a dream that you had as a young kid. And is that something you could share with us here?
Sure. I was a very ordinary kid. I grew up on Long Island, and I went up to a boarding school in Concord, New Hampshire, an Episcopal place called St. Paul's, when I was about 13. And I've been there a couple of years. I had many great friends there who I'm still close with. It was just a fabulous, creative place to be. And I love.
It was an Episcopal school.
It was an Episcopal boarding school. It was all boys at the time. And I studied world religions even then. I was in love with Emerson's idea of the oversoul, this sort of connective mind that brings us all into this oneness that we don't quite understand. So I was always reading Hindu and Buddhist and literature from literally every tradition. And when I was 15, I had a dream. It was, we had to go to chapel, by the way, every morning, no exceptions, you know. And chapel was at 8 o'clock. So I had a dream one morning. It was probably about 5:30 in the morning. And I wasn't sure if I was awake or asleep. It was a little bit of kind of a betwixt and between feeling of consciousness that wasn't quite normal.
Yeah.
I saw a road in front of me that was leading to the west. It was very foggy. I couldn't really see more than a few feet in front of me. And I looked to my left, and there was a young man with stringy blonde hair about to jump off a ledge. Perhaps it was a bridge, I didn't know, but a ledge. And then a blue face, a light blue face, came into the picture. And I took it to be an angel, although I did not believe in angels. I'm not sure I do now, but it said in a very feminine voice, if you save him, you too shall live. And
Wow.
then the fog, the haze lifted, and it was bright blue, and the angel disappeared. And it was almost granular in its reality for me. So I would go to my little seat, my pew in the chapel early, and I would meditate on this dream. I had it 6 times in a period of a year, probably spaced out every other month.
Wow.
And that was strange to me. And I talked about it in my sacred studies class with Rod Wells, who was a wonderful Episcopal priest, very much into Eastern religions, and a graduate of Yale Divinity School. Talked about it with many of my friends, and it became a conversation piece back in the day. And one day, Rod decided that we should go to Yale Divinity School. I was at the time 16, because there was a fellow there named James Diddies who taught psychology of religion to the divinity school students there. Rod knew him well. So we actually drove from Concord, New Hampshire to New Haven. And I was the subject in that class with about 15 MDiv, Masters of Divinity School students. And we talked about adolescent spirituality. And they asked me about my dream, and they asked me some very interesting questions. And among others, you know, are you okay? Are you well? And I said, yeah, you know, I get along with people. I'm doing perfectly nicely. And they said, what did the dream mean to you? And I said, well, I'm not sure, but it felt like something pulling me to the West and asking me not to be exactly what most St. Paul's kids turn out to be, which is to go to Wall Street or be on a law firm. And and that was it. We talked about Emerson. I said everybody up there reads Emerson and Thoreau. I think I'm maybe the only person who really believes the idea of the oversoul and reads the Upanishads and such things. And so it was a very wonderful moment. And we ended by going to the chapel there. I played a little Johann Sebastian Bach on my classical guitar. And then Rod and I drove back to New Hampshire.
As somebody who struggled to learn guitar, tried to teach myself classical guitar. I taught myself some Fernando Soar pieces.
Oh, okay.
But didn't get past that. I really, that's another wonderful accomplishment, I must say, on your part. So your book turns out to be a biographical road story, much like Jack Kerouac's On the Road,
Yes.
which you also mentioned at some point. So I know you read that book.
Yeah.
I was inspired by that book, I know. And but your road trip had an underlying spiritual theme. I think that was missing from his, at least explicitly. And you have so many synchronistic, spiritually significant adventures on this road trip on Route 80. It's amazing, and that's what the book is about. And you write in the third person. You refer to the boy this, the boy that, and why did you choose to write as the boy?
As I started writing these episodes of synchronicity in 2000 when I was at Case Western, and I used it as an electronic newsletter for the institute that I'd founded. But about 2004, I stopped writing, and at that time, I wasn't writing in terms of the boy, the third person. But about 4 or 5 years ago, as I decided that I really did want to pull this together into a book and make it more coherent. It's not so much a memoir as a series of synchronicitous accounts. I started thinking that it gets very boring when you're talking about I. And it just didn't sit well with me,
Yeah.
And also, I would really smile when I thought, David, about the boy, the boy on Route 80, the boy there, the boy there. It gave me a little bit of a distance on it existentially, and it just made it come alive.
A little bit of a what?
A little bit of a distance.
A distance.
Existentially. I wasn't so introspective. I was just writing about this boy.
As I thought about it, at first I think my first reaction was it felt a little off-putting. But then as I got into it more, you were so open as a boy.
Yeah.
You had the openness of a young person.
Yeah.
And somehow, I think you've hung on to that, quite a bit of that, through your life. And it put me in touch also with, my boy, do I remember back to being a boy, etc. So
I'm a big believer in, that idea of the child within, and that we always have that. It's a very Hindu and Buddhist concept. Jung talked about it. We have that within us, and the world can be very difficult. It can be filled with challenges. We can grow weary of the kinds of obstacles that we confront. But in the end, if we stick with that child within, that sort of eagerness to do good, that eagerness to learn, that eagerness to be bright and joyful, if we can maintain that, then it helps us a lot. So I'm a little older now, but I'm still, I think, a bit mirthful and a little bit boyish at times.
Good for
and
you.
It keeps me young. It balances things out.
Yeah, good for you. And
But the dream was important. I kind of let it go for a couple of years. I got into Swarthmore, and Rod got me a job tutoring. I'd been tutoring in New Hampshire at a little school on Pleasant Street with the French Canadian kids who were quite underserved. And I loved that. I think that's when I became a teacher, and I've always been that. But I went home. Rod had a job for me in the Bronx tutoring young African-American kids there. And my mother and father thought it was too dangerous, so they just put their feet down. And we had, a bit of an argument for several days. And finally, my mom said, look, I'm not even going to cover you for Swarthmore if you insist on this. And I relented, and I said, okay, well, what am I going to do this summer? And my dad was the president of W&J Sloan's furniture store on Fifth Avenue, across from Scribner's Books, and he knew all the manufacturers across greater New York. So he said, I've got an idea. Why don't you work in Bill DeBono's lampshade factory? I knew Bill DeBono a little bit, in Patchogue. So I said, Dad, this is going to be very difficult for me, but I'll do it. So I started driving Dad's secondhand gray Mercedes 180, which had seen much better days, or 190 that had seen much better days. Started driving it to the factory. It was about a 40-minute drive. And I was on an assembly line cutting cardboard between two very large Italian women, and Bill would be around with his cigar. There was no air conditioning.
Oh, boy.
And I wasn't particularly a happy camper. And after a couple of weeks of this, on a Friday night, I just drove that Mercedes out to West Hampton Beach, which is out on eastern Long Island. It's kind of a hangout, and I had some friends from St. Paul's who lived there. So about 11 at night on a Friday night, I just said to my friends, look, I don't think I want to go to college. It's just not worth all of this. And I don't necessarily think that I need to get an education right now. So I'm going to follow my dream, and I'm going to drive to the West. Now, again, it wasn't just that I was following the dream. There was the push and the pull. The push was things were not smooth at home. And I wasn't happy to be cutting cardboard. But the pull was the mystery of this dream.
Yeah, and I'm struck by the fact that you were aware that you were being diverted from your dream, where you felt the pull, but you really wanted to honor your father. And so you were willing to try to accommodate him. But then ultimately you found you couldn't do that, and you needed to listen to this call that was so strong in you.
Yeah, and it was highly intuitive. And if you asked me if I was sure of anything about that call, I would say no. But I had to take the journey for my knowledge to become clearer. So I drove that Mercedes one night again, which has seen a lot better days, and it had been in the shop. My dad, I think, only got it so he could drive me up to St. Paul's and look good with all the well-to-do folks up there, because he was kind of middle class. And so I drove through the Midtown Tunnel. I drove over the George Washington Bridge. I'd never been over it before. And there was a sign. Well, there were two signs. One said 95 South, which I didn't want because I was going west. So I took Route 80 West. And I drove through Pennsylvania, and it was about 5 a.m. And I was thinking, I have to confess, I was thinking seriously. In fact, I'd made up my mind. I'm turning around. I'm going to do a U-turn over the Midway, and I'm going to drive back, and my reputation will be untarnished, and everything will be fine. But just as I was thinking that, I was on the right-hand side of the road. The generator broke. Back then, cars had generators, and all the power, the lights, the engine, everything went dead instantaneously. And all I could do was barely get over on the right, because there were big trucks, and it was not safe. So I got over on the right, and I looked around me. This was near Lewisburg, Pennsylvania. All cornfields, wheat fields for miles and miles. The light was just beginning to come up over the horizon, and there were no cell phones back in the day. There were no telephone booths. So what could I do? I had my classical guitar. I had a couple of books, including Siddhartha and a few others. Um, I had a few bits of clothing, just some underwear and some socks and things, an extra shirt. I had about $40 in my wallet. So I reached into the glove compartment, I pulled out a piece of paper, and I wrote in pencil, to the Pennsylvania State Police, please return this car to Henry A.V. Post, 44 Davison Lane East, West Islip, New York, 516-669-566, from his son, Stephen, who no longer works in the lampshade factory. Now that was bad. That was bad. And, and, and so I put my thumb out, and a big truck came by, and I won't go into all the details of an incredible trip. I got out to California, and I spent the summer with my.
Just to tap into that part because I remember it so clearly. The truck driver was a terribly spiritual person
Hmm?
who, and you two were able to talk, spirituality and quote scripture to each other, and just bonded very much.
Yeah,
And I think he even gave you some money, right?
yeah. And his name was Gary, and my middle name is Garrard, Garrard. So, and my uncle, after whom I was named, was Uncle Gary. So, I felt that was really quite remarkable. And my uncle actually died of alcoholism some years earlier. So the whole thing just felt right to me. And Gary and I got along well. He actually dropped me off in Chicago. I was in Grant Park for a couple of nights playing Villalobos on the benches. And I caught on with a van full of hippies, about 6 or 7 of them in the classical VW minibus. And they were going west. And I said, me too. We got, by the way, we got into Nebraska. This is a riot. And one of the young ladies said to me, you really should call your mom, because I told them the story. And so we pulled over, and there was a phone booth there at one of the service plazas. And I got on the phone, and I called collect to my mom. And there she was, and she said, oh my God, Stevie, you're alive. We can call off the Pinkertons.
Wow.
And I said, and it wasn't necessarily my best moment, I said, Mom, why did you call the Pinkertons? Didn't you get my note? I
mean, on the car.
Yeah, didn't you get my note? And she said, we got your note. And actually, my dad, it had the car towed back, and it was in the service station on Long Island. And we talked a little bit, and she said, so where are you going? I said, well, Mom, I'm going west, and I'd like to meet up with my cousin George, who'd done a couple of tours in the Green Berets in Vietnam and lived in the Mission District on Chenery Street. So I went out there, and I spent the summer on George's floor. Make me a pallet on your floor, as they sing.
Yeah, I love
the
that
song. And I drew a very, very bad number in the draft. I was, at that time, a member of the Nichiren Shosho Buddhist community, chanting Nam Myoho Renge Kyo, which means mystery and oneness and all those kinds of things. And that was a temple that was on the corner of Chenery and Market Street. There was an old Japanese gentleman there named Gus, who was my mentor. So I earned plenty of money that summer because I was playing Villalobos and Granados and Hispanic restaurants, and that's all there was in the Mission District. But I drew this bad number. So I turned the people at Reed College down. I'd actually applied, I forgot to say that I'd applied to Reed College. And I told that to the folks at Yale in that class because I just had an intuition about it. But I was going to Swarthmore, so I told them I wouldn't make it. So I called them up and I said, look, you admitted me, 4 or 5 months ago, and I regrettably turned you down, but I actually need to go to college now. And they said, okay. So about 7 a.m, gathered in front of the temple with Gus and George and a bunch of people. They gave me a Cajon zone, and this becomes important. A Cajon zone is a scroll. It's a classic Buddhist scroll, and it's got some beautiful writings on it. And it gives you luck wherever you go. It gives you luck and prosperity. So I put my Cajon zone in my backpack after Gus had explained the meaning of some of the symbols. And I took the Market Street bus and I walked across Golden Gate Park. I got to the Golden Gate Bridge, and there it was. I walked up that left side, and it was very hazy. I could see only 2 or 3 feet in front of me. I got to the middle of the bridge, and I heard a little noise to my left, and I squinted, and I saw the face of a young man with long blonde hair. And I
As
thought,
in your dream,
that,
I will remind our audience. Yeah.
yeah, kind of like in my dream. And I looked at him, and at that point, he realized I was there, and he got very angry. He said, "What are you doing here?" I said, "Well, I just want to say, I hope you're not planning to jump." And then he became irate because I had invaded his sacred moment. And what I did was I said, "Look, let me tell you, I think I'm here for a purpose." And I told him the whole story. I told him about St. Paul's. I told him about the dream. I told him about going to Yale Div School. I told him about my parents, about Bill DeBono, about leaving the car on Route 80, about calling mom from Nebraska, and about everything in detail. It took about a half an hour, and he was kind of mesmerized by that story, that narrative. And eventually, I said, "Look, I mean, it's in the book, but I said, if you're willing to step over the railing, because now there's a lot more on the Golden Gate Bridge. You know, there are nets and high railings, but at that time there was just one little railing that was about waist high. You know,
Yeah.
and I said, if you're willing to step over that railing and come over here, I'll explain. I'm going to give you my Cajon Zone, which I pulled out of my backpack. And I said, if I give this to you, your life is going to change." So he actually walked over the railing, and I introduced myself. His name was Harry. We talked a little bit. I showed him the Cajon Zone. I unscrolled it. I explained some of the symbols, which were very similar to the sort of Larry Dossey theme of one mind. And Larry wrote the foreword to God and Love on Route 80.
Yeah.
He was so kind and generous to do this. And the Dalai Lama, His Holiness, wrote a preface as well, which I just got on August 1st, a little late, but it was still nice, because he's also someone who accepts this notion that there's mind before matter. So I explained this to him, and I said, "Look, here's a little money, and I want you to take this Cajon Zone, go walk south on the bridge, walk over the park, get the bus, and go to 4 Chenery Street, and give this note to my cousin George." And the note said, "Well, George, this is Harry. Make sure he gets a shower. Let him sleep where I was sleeping. Bring him down to the temple. Introduce him to Gus, and I'll, and that was it." And so we said goodbye, and Harry had calmed down. He was quite peaceful. And so I walked in the opposite direction, because I'm walking north toward Portland, Oregon.
Right.
And as I'm walking north, suddenly, all the fog, all the haze, just it's gone, and it's a blue sky. And it reminded me of that experience I had in the dream, when the sky just opened up and the blue angel was there, and so forth. And I felt somehow that moment was meant to happen. And it occurred to me, even as I was getting toward the end of the bridge, that that dream I'd had, it had been 2 years earlier, right? Because I was 15 going on 16 when I had the dream.
Okay.
And it was 3,000 miles away, and I was never sure of the dream, or sure if I should follow it, or sure what it meant when the angel said, "If you save him, you too shall live." I didn't quite know, but it's somehow seemed to be coming true. It was coming into reality. And that gave me a confidence. I felt at that moment that, like everyone else in the universe, I too was cherished in a way by this kind of energy, this spiritual energy that we don't understand very well. And as soon as we start pretending that we understand it, we get in trouble. But that there was something happening in my life, and that was absolutely transformative.
And one of the things that really strikes me again about you, the open boy, is that you were so open to all of these different spiritual traditions. You didn't reject any of the traditions, uh, but you were able to plug into them to the extent that they supported this experience, this notion, this experience, this belief that that spirit comes before matter, and that was the only thing that was important to you, and that if the rest of the world behaved in this way, I have to observe, we wouldn't have the troubles that we're in today. Um,
Oh yeah, no, I'm such a believer in this idea of one mind. You know, and I think if we understood how how much we are interconnected, and that what we do to others, we're doing to ourselves as well. I think that's incredibly important. And our ultimate goal, I think, is to be aware of our oneness, and so that we can truly love one another. You know, that's something that's been taught for millennia, but we haven't gotten all that good at it. And we still have experiences of great violence and hatred and bitterness and hostility
yeah,
that,
yeah,
you know. But I got up to read. I mean, I actually did make it up to read. I mean, at the end of the bridge, I stuck my thumb out again, and this farmer's truck came by, and a guy flung the door open, and he said, "Where are you going, boy?" Which was incredible, you know.
yeah,
And but I'd also had a cross country coach at St. Paul's, Senor Ordonez, who called me the boy. So people up there did actually refer to me in that way. So there is a little more to it than you might
yeah,
think. But I got up to, he flung his door open and he said, "Where are you going?" I said, "I'm going up to Oregon." And he said, "Well, we can get you most of the way. My name's Dwayne Dill, Dill, just like in dill pickle." I'll never forget that, because it was such a moment for me. And then he looked across the seat, and this is my wife, Dorothy Dill. And she looked at me and she said, "Yep, jump in." So they gave me a ride, and astonishingly, it was a very interesting time to be up at Reed. But that's the next episode comes when it's late January. I haven't been home yet, and it's raining like crazy. You know, it doesn't snow up in Oregon, but it can get slushy. And I'm sitting in the coffee shop, and it's 9 o'clock at night, and this guy named Andy comes bursting through the doors with his motorcycle jacket on and his curly red hair. He looked like he was a bit of flame. And he said, "My name's Andy. Who wants to go for a ride on my brand new Harley Davidson Shovelhead?" And I don't like motorcycles. I'd never ridden on one before, but I couldn't resist. I thought it might be cool because I was sitting there with my friends. And so I went out in the parking lot and I jumped on this thing. And Andy took off, screaming into the rain. He hit about 160 in 2 or 3 minutes. He went through every red light, every stop sign, got out on the Pacific Coast Highway, and he drove for an hour. And I was screaming, I was crying, I was so scared. I really thought I was dying because he was slipping and sliding, and he was just out of his mind. And he at some point he actually did a U-turn, kind of Evel Knievel style, and he drove me back. Then he dropped me off exactly where he picked me up in front of the coffee shop. And I thought it was a miracle that I was alive. And I staggered across this wooden bridge. There was a ravine at Reed that led to Ackerman Dormitory, where I was living at the time. And lo and behold, I got through the door, and just as I crossed the threshold into the common room, remember it's 11 at night Pacific time, it's 2 in the morning Eastern time. I never picked up the phone. There was a payphone on the wall. I never picked it up. My mom and dad could not get a hold of me. but I had given them the number just out of respect. And but somehow I felt pushed. Not I couldn't. There's nothing physically pushing me, but I just felt pressured to go pick up the phone. I picked it up and I said, "Hello," and believe it or not, it was my mom. She said, "Oh, Stevie, I had the most terrible dream. I woke up, I was sweating. I thought you were dead. Are you okay?" And I said, "Yeah, Mom, but I thought I was dead too." And I went to explain to her everything that had happened. And we even talked a little bit about the Blue Angel dream, and we sort of connected because Mom was a bit of she was Roman Catholic and a bit on the spiritual side, and she felt very special about this call, that she'd had this premonition about her son in such great danger. And to me, it was another indication that here I am, 3,000 miles away from the East Coast, and yet my mom can call me in this moment just as I'm walking past the payphone. And so that was more indication to me that there is a mystery to mind, that it's not just
Yeah.
local mind. There's a non-local aspect to mind, something people talk about, Deepak Chopra and Dasi and so many others.
Yeah.
And that my mom and I, in this field of love, I'll use Sheldrake's term, a field of love, were connected in this universal mind.
Yeah, that's such a great story. And there's just so many synchronicities in the book. And of course, about that story, I was interested in for a while in parapsychology. And Louisa Rhine, who was J.B. Rhine's wife, I think it was maybe after he died, she did a study of reports like the experience that you had, put an ad in the paper for people if they'd ever had any kind of an experience that was psychic. And a very huge proportion of them were of the kind that you've just described, of the mother whose son is in battle and almost gets killed, etc. So many people have had that kind of experience that she was able to document.
And you can't dismiss it. And
No.
and it really suggests that we don't fully understand the mind. I know the materialists want to say, well, it's just brain, it's just cells and matter. Well, that's part of it for sure. And I'm very into neuroscience, but I do think there's more to mind than we understand. And I just don't think that mind is explicable purely in terms of matter, because that leap from matter to mind is just inexplicable.
Yeah. So you're talking to somebody who's very interested in synchronicity and had some wonderful runs of synchronicity in my own life. What's your take on synchronicity? Why do we have synchronicity?
We are profoundly connected with this one mind. We have our individual mind, our individual consciousness, but we can be invaded. Ramanujan, the great mathematician in India around 1900, would be praying in front of his Hindu goddess, having no background in mathematics, and he would be inspired, and he'd write down these formulas on the dirt and come back later and put them in his notebook. His two notebooks are at the center of the library at Trinity College, Cambridge University, and they're the basis of most of quantum physics. You can talk about Michael Faraday, who said he dreamed about electromagnetic fields. People have creative moments, they have premonitions, they have all kinds of experiences that suggest that there is I will say, a creative, loving energy, an infinite mind, an original mind that underlies consciousness and that even underlies the whole universe. that we are participatory in. We're not the whole story, but we are connected with it, and that, by the way, to me explains some of the remarkable altruistic behaviors that we see, which have nothing to do with kin selection, have nothing to do with genetic preferences, but people who just do dramatically altruistic things for the stranger, putting themselves at great risk. I think part of that is because, well, Buber said there's I, it, there's I, thou. We may have a moral sense of the value of others as an end in themselves, not just as a means to our own little trivial purposes. But there's also I, that somehow I am also a part of the other's consciousness. And so when I save that other in some degree, I'm saving myself.
Well, that makes me think of, and I don't know anything about the background, but the Rastafarians use that expression, the I and I.
Is that right?
Oh yeah, yeah, and I think it's a reference to what we would call God.
Yeah.
And
well, that's God for me. God for me is an infinite mind of cherishing love that is hard to believe in when things have been going difficult, when things have been difficult in your life, when things aren't going well, when you're despairing, when you've had serious losses, serious disappointments, and you're just not open-minded about these things. I in the book, I refer to these moments in life as the expanding canvas, and oftentimes I've had moments of synchronicity just at those difficult times. And that's what I want to say. I don't think everything is synchronicity. I think there's chance and happenstance in the universe, of course, but I do think there are these special moments. So I'm just going to swing. I'm going to show you something, which you'll be
okay.
But so in the book, I spent 20 years living in Shaker Heights and raising our family there, and it was home. And there were some political issues, some financial issues in the medical school. And I had this offer to come to Stony Brook, and it looked pretty comfortable. And I thought, if I'm going to move on, I'm going to have to move on now. So I took this job. But I was very sad to be leaving. And, my son, who was just a junior high school kid, my wife, we were all sad, but we kind of thought, well, this was the prudent thing to do because this was a stable line economically. And in medical schools now, people have to kind of make their own salary, even to 100% with grants, and you can't do that forever. But I was very sad, and I was at University Circle near the Art Museum with my old friend Tom, and it was about 11 at night. We were spending that last night at Glidden House, this beautiful hotel, and I was behind Glidden House just quietly talking with Tom. It's July, it's warm out, and I'm just, really, really recognizing that I'm leaving home. And just at that moment, this old African-American fellow in a wonderful leather jacket with bells and all kinds of decorations, he comes out from the alley next to the Barking Spider, which was a pub there and a restaurant.
What town was this in?
This is in Cleveland. This is in Cleveland, okay. Ohio, because I'm at Case Western at the time, so I'm in Cleveland. So it's basically 12 years ago, and this guy comes slowly. He was quite elderly, a little bit frail, slowly walking through the alley, and he walks up to Tom and myself, and he says, I just had a feeling, an intuition that I should come here, and I should give you, and he pointed at me, this walking stick. This is the staff, okay? There's a picture of it in the book, and it's got a Star of David here and a face here, and it's beautifully carved. And he said, this will guide you better than you'll guide yourself. And I said, well, I love it. I'm going to take it, but can I give you some money? And he said, well, you could give me $40, but I don't really need it. So I gave him $40, which I borrowed from Tom. Tom remembers this so vividly, and I'm still always in touch with Tom. He's one of my oldest friends. And so this has always been my staff, my walking stick.
Wonderful.
And and that was a kind of a shamanistic
Yeah.
synchronicity moment that this
Oh,
fellow, and
really?
it turns out he's actually been written up in the Cleveland Plain Dealer, and he is a well regarded local arts and crafts type guy who loves to carve these kinds of things. But he was awakened somehow to come out that night and find me when I just happened to be behind Glidden House.
Wow.
And that, so that's, I can't explain that to you unless I have a sense of being looked after by a cherishing mind and love, even and maybe especially in the moments when I begin to doubt my own journey.
Yeah. Yeah. There's one more story that I've got to get out of you, another wonderful synchronicity towards the end of the book, I think. You must tell the story of the $100 prayer.
Oh, that's so funny. So, I got out of Chicago. We spent 2 years in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And I was a postdoc there, and I moonlit at Mercy College of Detroit, working with inner city nurses and in the Henry Ford Health System. But I had this nice offer to come to Fordham University to teach philosophy at the Marymount campus, which is in Terrytown, just across from the Tappan Zee Bridge. It's now the Mario Cuomo Bridge. And we had our little daughter, Emma, who at that time was 2 years old. And we were staying we stayed one night in a hotel. And I had to spend out all of my money to rent this one-bedroom apartment on Main Street in Terrytown because New York prices were so much more expensive than Michigan prices. I mean, I had to lay out like $5,000 to get this place, and it cleaned me out. So I was not wanting to completely blow away my credit card, although I guess I could have. And so my wife and I with Emma are sitting in the car. It was just a little secondhand blue Datsun Sentra, and it's about noon. And Mitsuko said, "Well, let's pray." And she said a prayer, and the prayer was for someone to come and give us $100. And I kind of went along. I was mildly amused. And then there was a little tap on the car, which I didn't think had actually occurred. I mean, I didn't even feel it, but Mitsuko said, "Somebody hit our car." So I got out the door, and there was this very wonderfully large African-American guy. He had a white hat on, a white suit. It looked like he might have been just coming from a Pentecostal service or something like that. And he looked at me, and in this very warm voice, he said, "Oh, I hope I didn't do too much damage. Let me do this." And he opened his wallet and he pulled out a $100 bill, and he gave it to me. And I said to him, "Sir, you are an answer to a prayer." And he laughed. And then we went in, and we were in a parking lot right at the Howard Johnson's restaurant there. So we went into Howard Johnson's. We had a nice lunch, and that $100 kind of got us through the next day and a half for little expenses while I was waiting for my check to come from Fordham, which came a day and a half or 2 days later. And we, in the meanwhile, were holed up at the Terrytown Hilton, but we had a little cash in our pocket. I didn't want to ask my parents for money because that was not like me. So that was unbelievable, that something like that
Yeah.
could happen.
Yeah, that was just such a wonderful story. And my maternal grandmother was a Pentecostal evangelist who, in her younger years, ran revival tent meetings around the country. And she would tell me this story about the time when she was really up against it. She had my mother, who was a little girl. They had no money. They were hungry, etc. And she was praying, and and then went outside, and I think there was snow. I don't remember where she was.
Mm.
And there was a $5 bill laying there in the snow, which was like just what was needed at that time.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
those things do happen. I know that from.
They do. They do happen. And Terrytown was beautiful. I loved being in Terrytown. Those were 3 great years. Um, and that's following the journey because I don't think we make our lives. I think that we respond to the opportunities, the people, the creativity, the love that just comes into our
Yeah.
path. That's what a journey is,
Yeah. And I
and there's
like that you shared. I like that you shared that you didn't always know
didn't always know.
that. That it's not like every moment of your life you had the sense that you were on a journey and everything was for a purpose, etc. That there were moments of doubt, or there were moments of just kind of following, maybe of just a very slight kind of intuition.
A little thread, a little
Little
thread.
thread.
Yeah, yeah,
That's an experience that I know for myself, and so
yeah.
it's wonderful to hear you describing it.
Yeah. So I got to
Um,
my office at the campus up on a hill in Terrytown, looking out over the Hudson. And my office mate is a guy named Gabe Gomez, who's still alive, Gabriel Gomez. He was from India, but he was Catholic because the missionaries got over there, centuries ago. And he was an expert on world religions. And he started asking me, well, so really, what got you into spirituality? And I told him about the dream and Route 80 and the car and everything and the Blue Angel. And he said, you have to right now walk around the reservoir and go to Peconico Hills, which is about a 15-minute walk. It's the Rockefeller enclave, and go to the Union Church and tell me what you see there. So I trusted Gabe, and he was a wonderful guy, kind of like E.T., and um, he had great insights. So I went to the Union Church there, and lo and behold, the whole back of the church is this Chagall blue stained glass window, famously called the Good Samaritan. And there are symbols from every spiritual tradition. And there's a big angel in the middle of it. And I just felt so compelled by this. I just stayed there and prayed for a while. And I went back, and Gabe and I talked about Chagall, and I became a little bit of a Chagall scholar. I even taught a little course on the spirituality of Chagall, which was very eclectic, although he was still to some degree true to his Judaism, but a Hasidic form of Judaism. And I even wrote a couple of articles on Chagall. And then when I came to Stony Brook, so now it's 2014, and I got an invitation. I've been here for 6 years. I got an invitation to go to Peconico Hills and give a talk on the spirituality of Marc Chagall. And I did that, and it was beautiful. And I loved doing it because it meant so much to me, because he was my partner. So Chagall, just to get into this, he had been raised in a small Jewish town. His dad had a factory and they pickled herring. And his dad did not want Chagall to be an artist. So when Chagall was 17, he ran away from home to St. Petersburg. And he lived on the streets, and he had no money. And he slept in an alleyway. And in his book, My Life, which he wrote about 12 years later when he was in Moscow, he says one night he was sleeping in the alley on a big old mattress, and he wasn't sure if he was awake or asleep, but he saw blue fill the alleyway, just this bright blue, and it was astonishing for him. And then he saw the face of an angel, and the angel alighted, and the blue remained behind. And the next day, Chagall, who at that point had only been sketching things, selling sketches on the sidewalk, he did his first painting, which is called The Apparition, and it's a painting of the Blue Angel dream. So I felt, here's a guy who wasn't working in the factory anymore. He ran away, dissing his father, and there's somehow or another, there's this idea of a blue angel. He called blue the color of love. And when he died outside of Paris in his studio, he was painting the Blue Angel. So that was very meaningful to me.
Sure.
And lo and behold, just to make it really short, so the Institute website in the fall of 2014 was hacked by ISIS. I won't go into the details. It's in the book. I actually have reported it to the FBI. And because we had a newsletter about unlimited love that went out all over the Middle East and so forth. And they thought this was not healthy stuff because their view was strictly their ISIS style thinking, and so I met with my board of directors, and we asked what we would do about this, and we decided to have an international essay contest, inviting young people from different age groups all around the world to write these sort of existential, personal essays about how they push back against peer pressure to hate other people who didn't share their beliefs. And we got so many responses, thousands, and we vetted them, and we gave out awards, some of them with cash involved if they were top 10. And at that time, I was co-chairing the UN population meetings on spirituality and sustainable development. And people learned from me as I was chatting that I'd had this experience in the essay contest. So in August of 2016, we were invited, the Institute, to be the premier event on World Youth Day at the United Nations. We filled the entire UN headquarters with young people who came from all over America, all over the world. And they performed these essays. Some of them were rap style. Some of them were on folk guitars. Some of them were with, you can't imagine. Some of them were dancing.
Yeah.
And this went on for the better part of 3 or 4 hours. I had medical students from Stony Brook who came there. And it was so beautiful. Pastor Otis Moss came from Cleveland to be the moderator. I had a violinist, Joanne Korzwinska from the Emerson String Quartet. And it was just beautiful. But, that I never planned that, David. It was just that, this is the way it worked out. And it all had to do with somehow this thread of a blue angel.
Yeah, yeah. And you said something about meaning at one point, and that kind of reminded me that that's kind of the hallmark of synchronicity, or quotes, meaningful coincidences.
Yeah.
And it's the meaning that makes them beyond a coincidence.
Yeah.
And so some here's people, this thread of meaning between you and Chagall, where in some sense you're recapitulating the same journey in some ways.
Yeah. And these kinds of connectivities are very subtle, but they're still a part of my life. In the book, I quote the great poet W.H. Auden. I actually keep his book, The Age of Anxiety, on my desk. But in the early 1930s, he was at Oxford, and he tells this incredible story about he's sitting there on one of the Oxford lawns with 4 or 5 friends. They're not close friends. No one's been drinking. He doesn't have a sexual interest in anybody. And lo and behold, he feels, his language is incredible, invaded by an energy of love that was not his own, that came from outside of him. And he knew in this incredible moment what it was to love other people purely just as they are, just as human beings. And then he says, later on, I asked some of them if they'd have a similar experience. And in fact, one of them had. And so, 4 years ago, I'm sitting here in my office. I don't talk much about these things, but they're part of my life. And a student, a Korean American young woman, came in. She was a medical student, end of her second year. She wanted to drop out because she came actually from a Korean evangelical background on Northern Boulevard, which is culturally very different than the background of most of these medical students. And she felt really alienated, and she didn't think she could become a medical professional. And she knocked on my door, and she asked if she could talk with me for a while. And she seemed to be struggling. And I said, wait a minute. So I've got a lot of appointments this afternoon. Why don't you email me and we'll set something up for next week, early next week. But at that point, I'm sitting right in this chair and I'm looking at her because she's over here. And I felt this unbelievable energy over my right side. And I actually turned around and there was nothing there. I mean, I don't see things. There was nothing there, but I just felt something and it was very warm. And my intuition from it was that, wait a minute, I need to stop everything I'm doing and I need to pay attention to this young woman. And that's what I did. So I canceled all my appointments. I spent the next 3 or 4 hours with her, very deep, very, very attentive. And it turns out I became her mentor. She spent a year writing reflective essays on her spirituality and on being a doctor. She eventually graduated. She is now practicing preventive medicine. And I'm actually officiating over her wedding, once this viral problem disappears. But I would not have given her that kind of attention. I mean, I would go with my wife into Queens and every month or two and just sit down at a Korean coffee shop with this young woman and talk with her and read her writings and let her read her writings to us. They were quite poetic. She was a gifted writer. And over that process, she began to realize how she could become a great doctor. But I would never have done that if I hadn't had that experience right here in this office, in this chair. Now, I can't explain it, but that's what happened.
Well, I feel so privileged to have been able to spend this time with you and Stephen, and I think that this is about where I would wrap it up. So,
Yeah.
so I appreciate you sharing so much of your inner life with us here. And, I was tempted to ask you, how should we cope with this COVID situation that we're in right now? But I think that a person can deduce
Yeah.
from what you've said and from your presence here, can take a message from that. So I'm just going to thank you for being my guest today on Shrink Wrap Radio.
Well, David, it's a pleasure. And, I'm really happy 13 years after we were talking about why good things happen to good people to be talking about these deeper metaphysical, spiritual aspects of our experience. It's still why good things happen to good people, and expanding the canvas and like a Jackson Pollock painting, and it looks like nothing, and when he just throws gunk down in the middle of the floor, but as he expands it outwards, that's why I say life is an expanding canvas.
Yes.
And this COVID business is very serious, and there are a lot of serious things going on in the world, but we have to go through this because we're going to get out on the other side and everything's going to be better and in an enduring way. That's my sense of it.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you again.
It's a pleasure.
And hopefully we'll talk again in the future.
Yeah, I hope so, David. Stay well.
You too.